Hey there, welcome back to ISHI 34. I'm Jordan Villanueva, one of your ISHI Central co-hosts here. And I'm here with Natasha, who's going to tell us a little bit about the case that she's going to present this afternoon in the general session. Natasha, thanks for joining me. Can you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm the DNA technical leader for the St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office. I've actually been in the field for 27 years, but I've been at the St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office for about 17 years.
27 years in forensics. How many times have you been to ISHI during that time?
I think it's definitely over 10 times. Since I've been with the St. Tammany Parish Coroner's Office, I've been to ISHI pretty much every year except for the COVID years when we weren't allowed to attend in person.
Wow, that's a lot of ISHIs. What keeps you coming back to this conference?
This is a great place to get all kind of knowledge, and I'll actually kind of mention that a little bit in my talk today because it was ISHI conferences that introduced me to the advanced different DNA technologies that we don't do in the public crime laboratories.
Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear like specific things that people are taking back to their work from ISHI that they're learning about. That's wonderful to hear. Tell me a little bit about this case that you're going to be presenting on this afternoon.
So we actually had unidentified human remains that were found in our parish, and when conventional DNA, so when I say conventional DNA, I'm talking about, we've run the profile, we put it into CODIS, and we didn't get a hit that told us who the individual might be. So we looked at different types of technology that was the advanced technology at that time to see if they would help us identify our individual. So again, it was at ISHI that we had learned about DNA phenotyping that was being used by some other companies that are, again, not used in public laboratories. So we approached those companies to see if they could help us maybe get some information on what our individual might look like. Because of ours being in advanced stages of decomposition, we had no idea, what hair color he had or what eye color he had. And so we approached that company about providing that information for us. And when that didn't unfortunately provide leads, we had to wait a couple years for some more advancement to come on to the horizon. But again, that was about things that I learned at ISHI, and we found out about forensic investigative genetic genealogy, or FIGG. So it was again at ISHI where we learned about that. So we approached yet another company to see if they could help us out. But through all of this information and many dollars spent later on, it was actually through CODIS that we eventually solved the identity of our individual.
Wow, so a lot of different things coming together here. I want to, going back to the beginning of your story, your talk is titled "The Foot That Solved the Puzzle."
Yes, it is.
How does this foot come into play here?
So because our decomposed remains was actually partially dismembered, we were missing various pieces. So we actually were missing both of his arms and a portion of his right leg. And it was actually the foot that was found in a completely different state. And it was that foot that was uploaded, the profile from that foot that was uploaded into CODIS that later hit about 6 years. And that was actually not only provided the identity of our individual, but ultimately provided the suspect as well.
Wow. You mentioned that, things that you were dealing with were in advanced stages of decomposition. Tell me about the difficulty of even generating a DNA profile from remains in that state. Were there challenges to that?
Yeah, believe it or not, it was actually, we actually got really good quality and quantity of DNA in that case. Long before there were papers out, I have always been a huge advocate of if there's any way I can process anything else from the body that's not a bone, that's where I go to first. And it's only because our bone process takes us several days just to actually prepare the bone to where we can actually begin the DNA extraction process. And working for a coroner's office, they want our IDs turned around as quickly as possible because our ultimate goal is to try to reunite these remains with their loved ones as fast as possible. And so I typically have always used the toenail in the case. The pathologists love to look at me and go, "What do you want?" And I say, I always want the toenail. It's usually something that will not have foreign DNA found underneath them. And it's something that generally they always have, unless we're dealing with skeletonized remains. So in this case, like I said, we had very good quality and quantity of DNA, and it was actually that extraction product that was used at these additional advanced DNA techniques that we were able to send to these companies, and they used to develop the DNA phenotyping and eventually the FIGG technology, so they didn't have to actually do additional extractions.
Wow, toenail. That's interesting. You hear a lot about, swabs or bone, often in remains, but I think this is the first time I've heard about toenails. That's
And it's an interesting you should say that, but like I said, I thought it was kind of a weird technique, but there was actually a paper presented here at ISHI. It was a poster, and I actually talked to the lady that actually produced the poster, and they had been using it in, I forget which country, I want to say it was like Australia or some other country, but they presented here at ISHI, and so I've kind of felt validated by my my weird technique.
Oh, that's awesome. And you made that connection after you'd been doing this for some
Yes.
time?
Ever since I started working for the coroner's office, that was always my technique.
Oh, that's really cool. I love, making those connections later. That's really interesting. So you're generating the profile, you're not getting CODIS hits, and you said from there you moved more into DNA phenotyping? Was that the next stage?
So we moved to phenotyping because then in 2016, that was actually the advanced DNA technique at that time. Mm-hmm. And because we were wanting to know things like, maybe hair color, eye color, because when we went to the public and we were trying to find out the identity of our individual, we weren't able to provide them with any information because we had no idea what he looked like. And so that was why we contacted this company to see if they could help us provide this information to the public. And they were able to do that, and they were actually able to give us a poster prediction of what that person might look like so that we could provide that with the public.
Wow. And so later as you confirm this identity, was that close? Were you able to create a picture that was close to what the person actually looked like?
I think so. So again, in my talk today, you'll be able to kind of see a comparison of what his actual driver's license looked like compared to the poster predictions that we got from that company, as well as the facial reconstruction that was done by our anthropology department.
Wow, that's super fascinating. DNA phenotyping is a really interesting technique. And then from there you moved into FIGG, correct?
That's correct.
What were you able to learn from your FIGG work?
So FIGG actually further established the fact that we had some genetic genealogy that linked back to the Greek population, which, believe it or not, actually helped kind of narrow down things for our investigators. Because when they were eventually ciphering through all this documentation that they got from this suspect's belongings, they were able to kind of say, okay, this guy's name kind of sounds like maybe it has some Greek relationship, and that was how they were able to narrow down what they thought who our victim actually was. And that was substantiated because that was actually presented with the DNA phenotyping that he maybe had some Greek ancestry, and then FIGG basically said the same thing. Unfortunately, with FIGG, we were not able to determine any matches because the hits that we were getting was like third and fourth cousins, so they were really far down the line. And again, that company worked really hard and was constantly trying to get additional leads in that case. There just wasn't enough people in the GEDmatch database to actually give them, the leads that we needed.
Sure. So you're gradually getting closer and closer here, using some of the biggest emerging techniques over time. How did you end up eventually finding the identity of this person and these remains?
So our investigative officers at the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office were then put in contact after our CODIS hit with another agency in the state of Mississippi, who were the one that actually had the foot. And they were able to compare their notes on the two different investigations. And as they literally went through the various paperwork that they had actually found in this individual's trailer that they had seized after they found the foot underneath the trailer, they were able to determine that some of the documentation that was found under a different individual's name, they had found like his last will and testament, his driver's license. There were also some various other paperwork that had his name on it. The first thing our investigators did was when they looked at it, they said, this guy's name sounds like it's heavily related in Greek roots. And so they contacted his next of relative and determined that, they didn't know much about his last whereabouts. They had been estranged for many, many years. And he said that he would be more than happy to provide a DNA sample. So that DNA sample then was submitted to our office, and we provided confirmation that it was in fact his father that we had identified.
Wow. So this is a story that involves, it involves advanced techniques, and it involves so much collaboration with, with public labs and private labs and across state lines. I love, it's a very ISHI story to hear all of these, connections coming together to find an answer. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, because it's not only the technology of DNA that was imperative for our investigators, but it's also about the good solid police work that went on between two different states, the communication between the two different law enforcement agencies, but not only that, but the communication between multiple crime laboratories, because it was not only our crime laboratory, but we had to work with our state laboratory to get some searching done in CODIS that because literally when we were developing our profile, these predated some stuff that was going on in CODIS. Now we can do what's called an emergency search, so where you can actually just push a little button, our profile automatically goes up to our state lab and searches, and they can punch a little button, and it automatically goes up to the national level and searches. Back in 2016, that wasn't the case. We actually had to fill out paperwork, and then we had to actually call our state lab and kind of beg, borrow, and plead to see if they would do an emergency search. And then the same thing happens when you go outside the state. And so not only did we miss the day of our upload, because the upload day was the day prior to us finding the body, so we had to ask our state lab to not only do an emergency search on paper, but we had to ask them to do that emergency search on a weekend. And they accommodated us. And not only that, but then we had to ask the Mississippi Crime Lab to do that same search on a weekend, and they also accommodated us. So that just shows the camaraderie between multiple laboratories to do what's best for a particular case to try and solve it.
That's so important. I'm really happy to hear you talk about that collaboration happening. The last thing I want to ask you, because I do want to, I'm planning to attend your talk this afternoon. I don't want to know everything going in.
And you still don't know everything just yet.
Good. Oh, I'm so glad. Get a little teaser for people watching. But the last thing I want to ask you is, what are some things that you've learned from this case that you're using to inform your ongoing work?
So you can't overlook anything. Like I said, there are a few things that I haven't talked about just yet, and there were some little things that a lot of people may not have looked at and talked to law enforcement about. And there were some leads that we gave them, even though those leads didn't, pan out into actually identifying our victim. It did actually, when we found out in the end, point them in the right direction. We just didn't know that it was the right direction at the time. So it gave them a foot in the right direction, but not necessarily the right direction. It didn't help them identify him at that, into the 2016. It just, we found out in 2022 that we were actually getting really warm. We just didn't know that at the time.
Wow, okay. Those are great lessons to learn. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for this preview of your talk. I'm looking forward to hearing the whole thing this afternoon, but enjoy ISHI. Great luck this afternoon, and thanks again for your time.
All right, thank you.